The other night, my wife took our child out for several hours to visit a friend and run some errands. During that time, I decided to finish up some work tasks that I had been putting off. I answered emails, completed a few reports, and made a couple of phone calls. Once I was done with work, I realized I was hungry and decided to go out for dinner around 4:30 p.m. I drove to a nearby restaurant, enjoyed a leisurely meal, and took some time to unwind. By the time I got home, it was around 6:30 p.m. Around 7:30 p.m., my wife and our child returned home. We caught up on each other's day, shared some laughs, and played with our child for a bit. Afterward, we settled down on the couch to watch a TV show together. As the evening wore on, I started feeling tired. Knowing I had to wake up early the next morning to take care of our child, I decided to head to bed around 9 p.m. Maybe 2 minutes after crawling into bed, I received a text from my wife, which seemed unusual since we were both at home. The text included a picture of our dry erase menu board on the fridge. At the start of each week, my wife typically fills out a rough menu for our dinners. I remembered seeing it earlier in the day, and it was filled out as normal. However, the picture she sent now showed the menu completely scrambled. The neatly written list of meals was gone, replaced by jumbled letters, random words, and bizarre squiggles. It looked almost like a child's scribbles, but more chaotic. There were incomplete words and strange symbols mixed in. Some parts of the board had my wife's recognizable handwriting, but other parts had unfamiliar handwriting, neither mine nor hers. The words made no sense. Some sections were filled with squiggly lines and doodles that looked hastily drawn. This sight was unsettling, to say the least. We both felt a wave of confusion and fear. Our 1-year-old child, who had been with my wife the entire time, was definitely not responsible for this. The more we stared at the picture, the more disturbed we felt. It was clear that someone or something had tampered with our board while we were away. We tried to rationalize what had happened. Could it have been a prank? But who would come into our house just to mess up our menu board? The thought of an intruder being in our home without us knowing was deeply unsettling. This was not just a minor inconvenience. It felt like a violation of our personal space and safety. This freaked us out. We immediately called the county sheriff's office to report the incident. The dispatcher assured us that an officer would be on the way shortly, but those minutes of waiting felt like an eternity. We double-checked that all the doors and windows were locked, and we stayed together in the living room, anxiously awaiting the sheriff's arrival. When the sheriff arrived, he took our report seriously. Despite his thorough inspection, he found no signs of a break-in or any other disturbances in the house. The sheriff mentioned that it was very unusual to get a call like this in our quiet, rural area. He said that in his years on the job, he rarely dealt with incidents like this, especially ones with such eerie and inexplicable details. His concern was evident, and his unease only added to our own. He recommended that we change our locks immediately. I used to sleepwalk when I was a child, and it became a frequent and unsettling occurrence for my family and me. We lived in a rough neighborhood in Decatur, GA, where the streets were often empty at night, and the atmosphere could be quite intimidating. My sleepwalking episodes would usually start with me getting out of bed and wandering through the house. Sometimes I would end up outside in the middle of the night, standing on the front lawn or the sidewalk, not knowing how I got there. These episodes were always disorienting. I would wake up to find myself under the night sky, feeling a cold breeze or the rough texture of the pavement beneath my bare feet. The worst part was the journey back home. I would have to muster the courage to walk back to the house and enter through the darkened doorway I had left wide open. Every creak of the floorboards or rustle of the bushes sent shivers down my spine, as I was always aware of the potential danger lurking in our neighborhood. My parents were very concerned about my safety. They tried various methods to keep me from sleepwalking, such as locking the doors and installing safety gates, but I somehow always managed to find a way out. The unpredictability of my sleepwalking made every night a challenge, leaving us all on edge. The most terrifying experience of my sleepwalking happened when I was about 9 years old. It was a chilly autumn night, and I remember going to bed feeling uneasy, though I couldn't pinpoint why. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to find myself standing by the window in my bedroom with the curtains drawn back. The room was dimly lit by the streetlight outside, casting eerie shadows on the walls. As I started to become fully awake, I noticed something incredibly unsettling. Just outside the window, a very large, completely hairless man stood, staring directly at me. He had no hair, no eyebrows. His face was smooth and shiny in the faint light. His eyes were wide with a bewildered expression, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. He was slowly inching closer to the window, his face drawing nearer to mine with each step. In that horrifying moment, I realized the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just a strange dream or a figment of my imagination. There was a real, menacing figure right outside my window. Panic surged through me, and I started screaming uncontrollably, frozen in place by fear. My body reacted in sheer terror, and I felt warm urine trickling down my leg as I stood there, unable to move. The man's reaction was equally frantic. My screaming seemed to snap him out of his daze. His eyes widened even more, and he let out a scream of his own. He quickly performed a tumbling move, as if he were trying to evade some unseen threat, and then bolted off. He ran in a bizarre zigzag pattern, like someone dodging bullets in a war zone, and disappeared into the darkness. The scene played out in a matter of seconds, but it felt like an eternity. When my mom rushed into the room, she found me still screaming, shaking with fear. She tried to calm me down, thinking I had just had a nightmare. Despite my frantic explanations, she remained skeptical, attributing my terror to an overactive imagination or a particularly vivid dream. The next morning, however, we found concrete evidence that something real had happened. On the front porch lay a screwdriver, and there were clear signs of tampering with the door jamb and door handle. The damage suggested that someone had indeed been trying to break into our house. This discovery left my mom shaken and more inclined to believe my story. We reported the incident to the police, who took our statement and the screwdriver as evidence, but as far as I know, they never caught the man. This incident marked the peak of my sleepwalking experiences, and it had a lasting impact on me. My parents took even more stringent measures to ensure my safety, and I gradually outgrew my sleepwalking episodes. However, the memory of that night, with the hairless man staring through my window, remains vivid and chilling to this day. When my cousin was around 7 years old, his room was in the basement of their house. The basement level was half underground and half above ground, providing just enough elevation for a window to be at ground level outside. His bed was positioned right next to this window, offering a clear view of the backyard and the dimly lit street beyond. The window had thin curtains that did little to block out the outside world. One night, out of the blue, my cousin woke up. It was a quiet, dark night, with only the faint glow of the streetlights seeping through the curtains. As he opened his eyes, he was met with a terrifying sight. A man crouched right outside the window, staring intently at him. The man's face was partially obscured by shadows, but my cousin could see his eyes, cold and unblinking, fixed on him. Paralyzed by fear, my cousin didn't know what to do. He just froze, his heart pounding in his chest, every muscle in his body tense with terror. The man outside remained motionless, his presence menacing and inexplicable. After what felt like an eternity, my cousin summoned the courage to turn over in bed, turning his back to the man. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to convince himself it was just a nightmare. Remarkably, he eventually managed to fall asleep, despite the chilling encounter. To this day, it baffles me why he didn't run screaming to his parents' room, seeking safety and comfort from the unknown intruder. This unnerving experience wasn't an isolated incident. Over the following weeks and months, the stranger returned on random nights, his visits becoming a sinister routine that my cousin came to dread. Each time, the scenario was disturbingly similar. My cousin would wake up in the middle of the night to find the man crouched outside his window, staring intently at him. The man's behavior was unsettlingly consistent. He would tap lightly on the glass with his finger, a soft, rhythmic sound that would send chills down my cousin's spine. The tapping seemed almost like a twisted game, a way for the stranger to assert his presence, and remind my cousin of his helplessness. My cousin never dared to respond or acknowledge the man's presence, opting instead to turn over in bed and face the wall, hoping that ignoring the intruder would make him go away. On one particularly eerie night, the situation took an even more disturbing turn. Opposite the window was a large mirror, positioned such that it reflected the bed and the window perfectly. As usual, my cousin woke up to the sight of the man outside. Feeling the familiar surge of fear, he turned over to avoid looking at him. But this time, the stranger had a new tactic. He shined a flashlight through the window, bouncing the beam off the mirror to illuminate my cousin's face. The light was bright and intrusive, casting a harsh glow in the dark room. It was as if the man was saying, "I can still see you," making it impossible for my cousin to escape his gaze even by turning away. This game of cat and mouse wore heavily on my cousin's young mind. The fear of waking up to find the man outside his window became a constant source of anxiety. Each night, he would lie in bed, straining to hear any unusual sounds, dreading the telltale tapping on the glass. He never told his parents about the encounters, fearing they wouldn't believe him, or worse, that the man might somehow retaliate if he reported the incidents. Instead, he bore the burden of his fear alone, trapped in a nightly horror that seemed to have no end. The stranger's visits escalated over time, culminating in a terrifying night that my cousin would never forget. One night, as he lay in bed trying to fall asleep, he heard the now familiar tapping on the glass. But this time, it was different, more insistent, almost impatient. Gathering his courage, he turned over to see what was happening. To his horror, he saw the man not just tapping on the glass, but now actively trying to push the window open. Fortunately, the window held firm, its lock securing the barrier against the man's efforts. After several tense minutes that felt like hours, the man seemed to realize the window wouldn't budge. Frustrated, he stepped back, glancing around as if contemplating his next move. My cousin quickly turned over in bed, squeezing his eyes shut and praying that the man would go away. Eventually, he heard footsteps retreating into the darkness, leaving him once again alone and terrified. To this day, my cousin, now 31, has never told his parents about those terrifying nights. The memory remains a haunting mystery, a chapter of his childhood marked by fear and uncertainty. He often wonders what the man's intentions were and what might have happened if the window had been unlocked that fateful night. The unanswered questions and the chilling experiences have left an indelible mark on him, a reminder of a time when he was forced to face a terrifying presence alone.